All right, everybody. This is Truth and Telos Ministries. Gonna do a quick one today. A little bit of a, I guess, announcement of a side project that we're kind of working on as well. But essentially, what is taking place over the past couple weeks is I've begun looking at an ultra literal rendering of the, specifically the Aleppo Codex, um, which is regarded to be the earliest known complete manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, dating to about 1000 AD. Um, Using just an ultra literal rendering of every single word in Hebrew, kind of actually reveals a very interesting story. Like much different than what you might get with more modern translations. But I wanted to just use this opportunity as I've been kind of going through. I'm about halfway through Genesis using this methodology, using the etymology of each Hebrew word. Wanted to look at the creation account, but specifically about how, on a very core fundamental level, uh, the Hebrew etymology destroys the entire notion or dismantles the entire notion of universalism. And here's why. So when we look here at Genesis 1:10, okay, if we were to look at this in, let's say, for example, a uh, any number of modern translations, they would say that at the end of the dry land and the collection of the waters, it was good. Okay. Now, when we look here at this ultra literal rendering that I've got, it actually says, and he called out the name, the ones who bind by word and power, for the dried out ground, the land running below, and for the binding place of the waters, he called out the name seas. And he saw that it and he saw the ones that who bind by word and power, that it was functionally correct. Now, this is a very interesting idea here, okay? Because you've got the idea of something being functionally correct, and then you also would have the idea of something being opposite to that as being thought of evil. Okay. Now, the reason why I think this is interesting is if we look at Genesis 6. So I'm going to go down here and we'll look at Genesis 6 real quick. Let's see. Genesis 5. Okay. So in Genesis 6, chapter 5, again, any number of more modern translations are going to translate this as he saw that the intent of every man in his heart uh, was altogether evil. But look at what we have here, okay? In this etymological ultra literal rendering, we have, and he was moved to deep regret, he who is and causes to be, that he had accomplished the making of the very substance of the groundling in the land running below, and he took sorrowful toil unto his core of intent. So we now have something that is functionally correct and something that is sorrowful toil. Okay. Now, why is this? Well, we see here it's because in verse 5, and he saw, he who is and causes to be, that the dysfunctional and calamitous state of the groundling was numerous in the land running below, and every molded form of the weavings of his core of intent was only dysfunctional and calamitous all the day. So God has this sorrowful toil unto his core of intent because of a dysfunctional and calamitous state. Now, this dysfunctional and calamitous state is what we would call evil. It's a modern day word, the modern day rendition. Okay. So it's just important to kind of see where I'm coming from with this one. Again, this isn't going to be a super long stream, but I think it does bring forth quite the, let's say, picture that it's painting, because you have that which was functionally correct, okay, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 10. Something being functionally correct. Now, the opposite of it is a dysfunctional and calamitous thing. The whole point is that the words of good and evil, right, in the very distinct hyperliteral meaning in the Hebrew, would then necessitate that the God, okay, this is Elohim, the ones who bind by word and power, and also that is, excuse me, that's the Elohim, and then you've also got the Yahweh, which is what we can look at here when we saw the word for the one who is and causes to be, or he who is and causes to be. So Yahweh Elohim has an order. Okay, there is a functionality to God, and universalism essentially states that God's functionality eventually becomes null and void, which just it doesn't hold water. Okay, there's no logical argument that can be made. So the premises don't add up. It is not a logically functional soteriology, because you would have to say that God ceases to be functionally correct if the idea of evil and good culminates in a everyone is saved anyway, so there is no evil or good. So just a very interesting thought. I know I have a couple universalists that I talk to that I would be interested to see how they could reconcile this, because if you put it into a formula, A plus A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C, it doesn't jive, right? Unless we're saying that God eventually changes his character, right? What he does as a core basic functionality changes, and then you don't have the God of the Bible. You've got some sort of pagan idea of a deity, that one that can change on whim, that does different things. Like there's one God of the sky, and another God of the sun, and another God of the clouds, another God of the rain. If God is all encompassing, he who is and causes to be, the ones who bind by word and power, right? It begins to create a very compelling counter argument to universalism. So, as I go through this, also I do see a lot of covenantal eschatology being completely brought forth in this more literal etymological rendering of Genesis. It is actually very interesting. One thing that I guess I would say is when it talks about the garden, right? Look at what it says here. So in Genesis 2:9, let's look at 2:8 actually. And he planted, he who is and causes to be, the ones who bind by word and power, and enclosed protection in primordial delight. So this would be the garden in Eden. The garden is an enclosed protection in primordial delight. That's what Eden kind of renders out to. It's like the most core basic functionality of delight from the ancient place before. And he placed there the very substance of the groundling, which he had molded as a potter. He caused to sprout, he who is and causes to be, the ones who bind by word and power, from the very reddish ground, every tree desirable to the seeing and functionally correct for eating. And the tree of the lives was in the middle of the enclosed protection, and the tree of the intimate knowing of functionally correct and dysfunctional and calamitous. So I know that this is very like it seems very choppy to try and understand in English, but if we just look at the core basic message that's being brought about here, you have the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, this is the tree of the intimate knowing of functionally correct and dysfunctional and calamitous. So you still have that juxtaposition. What is good is functionally correct. What we would consider evil is dysfunctional and calamitous. And I think that holds water even in a modern day view, because somebody would say, well, murder is evil. Well, murder is not functionally correct, right? It is dysfunctional to the purpose of which God has created life. Life is meant to live and then die naturally. The taking of the life is dysfunctional. It breaks that chain, and it's calamitous because it causes a disruption in the functional correctness of God. So it's a very interesting concept. And again, when I said that, covenant eschatology becomes more prevalent because it's interesting that the Garden of Eden is called the enclosed protection, because in Isaiah, and I'm still working on Genesis with this translation, but I will say in Isaiah chapter 1, the eschatological message is that God would hedge in a place. Okay. Or is it in Isaiah chapter 2? Where there would be there would be like a protection. So we see here, like, for example, in Isaiah 1. Actually, yeah, this is the same idea in like verse 8. It says, "And left hath been the daughter of Zion as a booth in a vineyard, as a lodge in a place of cucumbers, as a city unbesieged." That's an enclosed protection, right? It's giving this idea of the safety. So I think it's quite interesting as I'm reading through this rendering. Also, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 2. So we could look at 1 and 2. So it says, "Let me sing, I pray for you, for my beloved, a song of my beloved, as to his vineyard." So we've got this vineyard, this enclosed protection. It says, "My beloved hath a vineyard in a fruitful hill, and he fenceth it, and casteth out its stones, and planteth it with a choice vine, and buildeth a tower in its midst, and also a winepress hath hewn out in it. And he waiteth for the yielding of grapes, and it yieldeth bad ones. So you see what he's doing here? This is an enclosed protection. It's fenced off. This is the vineyard, but it's got something that is bad in it. Well, that badness, again, is dysfunctional and calamitous. So it has to be removed from the enclosed place. So it's just interesting, something to keep in mind, something to consider. And I'm going to continue working on this translation. I think it, might be a very valuable tool for the full preterist argument, the full preterist framework. And as we just kind of showed, it's not when we realize what the words mean, universalism doesn't jive. So, all right, that's all I have. Until next time, take it easy.